All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Jesse Skiles. We're at Way Down Wines in Portland. That's January 28th, 2021. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jesse. We appreciate this.
It's my pleasure.
First question, why wine?
Never meant to do wine, ever. I was like, I grew up here. I was born in Eugene and grew up in Portland, and wine was always around. Like when I was a kid, like we'd go. My dad was like a member at Adelsheim, Patty Green, a little bit Erie, like a lot of like the late first, second generation wineries in the 80s. And so I got to know it then. Like I would, when I was in high school, like drive him out to like wine tasting and stuff for his pickups. So he was always around that. Like he was friends with Kevin and Carla Chambers when he was in college, which is how he got into wine. And so just was kind of around it, but it was something there, but it was never a thing where I was like, I want to do that. It was just, that's a thing that's in Oregon. And I had an uncle that was in wine who went to Oregon State and worked with Bruce Beal, planting a lot of the first vineyards like in the Eugene area, in Roseburg area. Like they planted a bunch of stuff in the early 80s. And he had a small vineyard in Kings Valley, and we'd just go down there and hang out. But nothing more than that at all. And my objective in life was to be a cook and to like do fine dining, like tasting menu kind of cooking, and like started cooking out of high school and went to my first like real cooking job at a restaurant was at a wine bar called 750 ml, which was in the Pearl District. And my first day there was the day that Jimmy Brooks passed away. And we catered I'm sure there were other people doing it, but we did a bunch of food for his funeral like the week after. But it was kind of a crazy time to jump into a first day of work. And I got to know some random wine people through the wine bar. It was like there weren't that many wine bars in Portland at the time, and I wasn't that old. I think I was like 19, 20. And it was it was like getting to know the industry a little more in a strange way. And then after 750 closed, I was there for like a year. It closed, and I decided to go to Culinary School out at the CIA in New York. And they had a really good wines program out there. It was very fun. The two wines professors were like classic. I think one of them, maybe Colpan, had his master's wine. I don't remember. Is that Steve Colpan? I think he had his master's wine. They were both very intelligent, very like classically trained wine guys, and it was like at 20, it was a really cool resource because it's like one of the few places where you can do that. And at the time, it was one of the few places you could do that as a minor, taste and understand wine. And on my externship, you do like a internship away from the school. After a year, I ended up at the herb farm up in Seattle, Washington, or in Woodinville. And, wine was a huge focus there. Huge focus. Like we had a great somm team. We were always like Bob Betts would teach us classes. And like the cool thing there is they involved all of the staff, the kitchen, the dishwasher, everyone got to go to do these wine classes that we did like every other week or I think it was every other week. And so that was just kind of learning more while not focusing on it. It was just kind of like a byproduct of whatever situation I was in, and kind of started to get more into like drinking and thinking about wine then, which just through those environments, it was kind of like not never something I had been like, it was like, oh, this is fun, tastes good, I know these people, I'll never forget the first time I met like Patty Green with my dad, just like this really amazing lady. And but that was just like a happenstance. It wasn't anything. And then at the herb farm, I met, became really good friends with the somm there, this guy, Mark Dumez, who had worked in New York, Felidia, and all these other great Italian wine restaurants. And we really started hanging out a lot. Like, we went to Napa for a week and just visited a bunch of wineries. And that was pretty fun. Like, I think I tried, it was like the first release of Scholian Project. Like, I had never had a orange wine, really, until that point, and trying that stuff. And a lot of the early, like, we met with Dave Finney, who went on to start Prisoner, and that was his first year of Prisoner. So we were just at like a custom crush cellar with his stacks of like, I don't know, 30 barrels of Prisoner for the next year. Just tasting through with him. That was pretty, never expect that guy would become like one of the biggest names in wine. And like, just Mark kind of got me more into Northwest wines, for sure. Like, we went to Escowin, I think it was like 21, and I was like, dude, I want to get a case of wine. He's like, well, get this, try this, try to get a base of what's going on. And then we'd go through and like taste, like pretty much every other day after service. And then he was like, really into like the wines of like Italy. Like, he had gone to Italy and worked in Tuscany, and he got me like really into some of those wines, and definitely how they worked with food. Like, the whole time, like, food was still, I had still at this point no intent of ever doing anything in wine. And then I went back to culinary school, finished school, and then came back to Portland. Didn't really know what to do. But one of my buddies was this chef Tommy Habits had a spot for me at Merriweather's, and so I went there and cooked with him, and we did a bunch of like wine events there. Just got more, like John Paul Cameron, and got to know him a little bit through that, and like, I ended up taking over the chef job temporarily at Merriweather's when he left, and I was hoping to go work in Italy at a 3-star restaurant at Calandre, but my visa stuff fell through and it wasn't happening. And my buddy was working at Owen Row, or my buddy's sister was working at Owen Row, and he was like, hey, you want to go cater this event? They had some I don't know, they had a really good food program for like people in the industry and the staff, and so we did this lunch. We went out there and did this lunch. I think it was their Chicago distributor or something like that was the first event, and I was like, it's working on trying to maybe open a restaurant at the time, and then the recession hit, so that didn't happen, and just went out and cooked at Owen Row. Didn't think anything of it. It was just like an odd job. Like, I'd done lots of catering and stuff, and it was great. Like, the community, we had a blast. We were only there for 2 days, and just got to know all the staff. And at the end, David was like, hey, do you want to be our chef, private chef? And David O'Reilly with Owen Row. And I was like, I don't have anything going on. Let me think about it. Like, I really just I was going to take the summer off and figure out what to do with my life. And I'd been working a little bit at Gilt Club, but it was, which is like the chicken restaurant, like the chicken name place from Portlandia. And it wasn't like, it was great. Like, I had worked with Jamie at 750 ml back in the day. And so, it was still very fun, like community and friends, but it was a stressful job because we served full menu till midnight. It's like, this isn't what I want to do get home at like 2:30 every morning. So I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And started cooking out there for their staff and their visitors, and got to meet a lot of amazing people doing that. And I thought it would just be like 3 months. And I'd like finish harvest with them, and then just go back to restaurants. And I was there for 5 years, almost, like just under 5 years. And started getting more involved in the cellar, just because like I'd cook lunch and be really bored. Like you'd see people working, and it's like, I want to, you know, instead of just driving back from the valley to Portland, I'm like, oh, let's try to be more involved in this. And there's a great crew, a really great crew at the time. It was very fun, like a very tight knit. Because Owen Road, it was busy at that time. It was like peak Owen Road. They were cranking it out, and so there's always opportunities to do stuff: help bottling, help topping, help in the lab, help clean stuff, help clean the floors, fix, you know, just whatever they needed. And it was just something different, something fun. And I think it was like towards the end of the summer, I had been there about 5 months. David's like, Owen Road had something unusual at the time, where they let anyone on staff make wine, and which in '08 was quite unusual for Oregon. It's much more common now. But I think there was like 4 of us on site who had our own small labels, and David was like, "You should make wine." I was like, I don't know. I don't know anything about this. And I kind of talked it over with my folks, and they're like, I don't know, could be a good opportunity, could be something fun. And I was still working on opening a restaurant. So I was like, you know, nothing else, I'll just make a little bit of wine and can have it as like a glass pour or something at the restaurant. Just be something fun to have. And just started doing it that harvest, and thought a lot about what I wanted to make, because Pinot is like, probably, you know, I knew more about making Pinot Noir just from being around the valley, and knew more about what I liked in Pinot Noir. But at the same time, there were so many people I really loved what they were doing that I don't think I could even compete with what they were doing. Like, I don't know, like the producers I liked, there was no point. Like, I think they're already very, very good. And I, at the time, knew almost nothing, like, other than like what I'd read and what I'd worked on at Owen Road. And like one of the things, we got to travel a fair amount through school and earlier in life, to France and Italy. And one of my favorite places was like the Rhone. Just like the food, just from a food aspect, like the Rhone is like the birthplace of gastronomy and haute cuisine. Like La Pyramide, like the birthplace of fine dining, like how we think of it, is in the Rhone. It's so I was like, you know, like, and I kind of liked what they did with Syrah in food pairing, and I was like, yeah, like, in Syrah in France, in Côte Rôtie, is not the same as Syrah in the Northwest, or definitely wasn't at the time, where like Napa was kind of the model for Syrah in the Northwest, like really big, bombastic, juicy wines. And I was like, I don't know, try to make some Syrah that was like food friendly. Like that might be the one thing. And yeah, David really helped me get some fruit. I think I bought some fruit from him the first year, and then another little vineyard down in the Umpqua. Just a couple tons, like 2 tons of each, and then a ton of Viognier to do like a Côte Rôtie style blend. And that was it. And like the cellar crew really held my hand. This great guy, Aaron Berlin, who was the cellar master, who used to have his own label, Merriman. He was really like my mentor through all this. But it was a tight crew. Everyone helped everyone. It was very like, we're all working on everything all the time. And yeah, that was how it started. And that's just, you know, no idea, no clue about anything involved with it. Not the compliance, I didn't have any idea what I was getting into there. But it was cool. It was a very fun time, and just got to meet a lot of people in the industry. I think '08 was a pretty changing year in the Oregon wine industry. You look at the producers who started in '08, there's a lot of the third or fourth wave of people. People had worked making Pinot Noir for other people who finally had made enough money or had a connection to start making their own wine. And a lot of vineyards came online in '08 too. Mm-hmm. So it was really cool to be part of that early, just community. It was still pretty small. We hadn't seen that was probably the start of the expansion, and so it was a much smaller industry at the time, and just kind of a weird thing to think about now.
You talked about not really knowing anything about the process. I'm curious if you remember from the first year or the first couple of years of making wine. What surprised you about it? What was the process like for you learning how to make your own wine? It was, fermentation is the same in food as saccharin. Cerevisier is pretty much 95% of all the fermentation in food. So I knew a little bit about that just from doing culinary fermentations. And the processes are pretty similar in some ways. Racking is kind of straining chicken stock. I mean, it's the techniques are the same in some ways, but the sanitation is completely different. So that was a big learning curve, learning about how to actually sanitize things. And just the attention to detail and cleanliness was a big learning curve. Learning how you ferment 2,000 pounds of fruit. This is how you handle this thing. And luckily, we had all the equipment. We had I was just one fermenter out of 1,000 or something there. So it was and I was already been working in the cellar. Through that, by the time I picked my fruit, we were almost done with harvest. So I'd already helped process 800 tons of fruit at that point. They were very busy. I think we worked with 30 different varietals, 40 different varietals in a given year from vineyards all over the Northwest. So it was a very quick, eye-opening start to it. And it was a unique opportunity where I could work with someone else any day. After I cooked lunch, go down and work in a lab for a day, or go pull samples, or go start inoculations, or help rack wine for bottling, because we were bottling during harvest too. It was so busy, we were just constantly going. So that was I never really had a chance to stop and think much about it during the time because we were so busy. And it was just the hardest things for me were figuring out how to work with the TTB and how to register and how to figure out just the bare minimums of owning a business or starting a business. It was while also just working 80 hours a week. Yeah. So tell me about that part of it. Was it when you made your first wine that year? Was it immediately commercial? Did you immediately go commercial, or was it just kind of an experiment?
It was originally. I didn't know anything about anything there. I guess somewhat lucky to very lucky to be at Owen Road. David's got a great sense of packaging, a great sense of branding, and I'd definitely say some of that stuff. Just the thought of how to present something was definitely it was there, and we were everyone was involved in some form in those decisions. When we would come up with a new label, it was very community open source kind of development on things, which I think is pretty unusual for something that size. Yeah, and the first wine I released, it was the Viognier, and I released it in March of 2009, and I just kind of cold called some people.
I had a couple friends who were buyers, and I was like, who should I talk to? What do I do now? And they're like, you should talk to these people. And I was pretty lucky at Onro. They also had their own distribution kind of delivery set up for them and some other small wineries. And so I just kind of jumped right in there. And so I could just go do sales like one day a week, and then they would deliver it. Because otherwise I couldn't have done it early on, like to do deliveries and yeah.
Sure.
So that was, and then just kind of started. And there's a really cool event in Paso Robles called Fausse Piste that they used to do biannually. I'm not sure if they still do it biannually anymore. They closed for a couple of years. Went down there in 2009 in the summer, and or in the spring, and went to a wine dinner. And Fausse Piste is pretty cool. It's like all at the time, it was all the Rhone producers from around the world came, like Chave, everyone pretty much came, like a lot of the big guys, and a lot of importers. And we just poured one day, and just poured 2 wines. So we're kind of an outlier. Like everyone else was pouring like their whole portfolio. And so our 2 little wines. I just wanted to go and hang out and see what people were doing. And got to meet. I went to like this dinner. I can't remember what's the name of the Chateau Saint Jean in Chateauneuf-du-Pape. They make like Deux Ex Machina. And went to their dinner and ended up sitting next to this guy, Peter Wygant, who was I didn't know who he was, but we just started talking, and turns out he's like an importer and was their importer for St. John. And we were just like talking, having a good time. And turns out like the next day he got let go from them. And he was like, hey, I'm starting a distributor in New York. You want to work with us? He was like, tasted the wines and was like, I don't know. I guess so. And we just started. It was like our first release, and I think we sent most of it to New York. Like they took like half of what we did, and most of the rest went to Sterling Whitted, was a buyer at Whole Foods in the Pearl at the time, and he'd worked at Onro. I don't remember if he was there, but he was out there that year. He'd worked there over the years during harvest, and they took pretty much the rest of it at Whole Foods. And it's like, well, I don't know. This is kind of I just started going from there. Just like every year, just making a little more wine and trying to think at that point more about what to do with Syrah and what I could do, what I could learn, what I could.
So from the start, you were pretty much. I mean, once you were in it, you were in it. There was not a lot of thinking about. You just kind of were in it. Tell me about the sort of the appeal to you of making wine, and about sort of the initial reaction to the wines you did put out there.
I think the appeal to it. It was fun. It was just something completely different, and it was just fun. It was really like. And again, it was like I was so young. I think I was 22, 23. So it was like I didn't have any other stuff going on in life. So it was just very like, I'll try this. Let's see what happens there. And it was just like got to meet, like made some like very good close friends now, like Barnaby from Teutonic. Like we met like that first year, and we just started going like, on like, just like bouncing. There was like a lot of ideas bouncing. Like I really wanted to do, like the one thing I knew early on, like the one thing I wanted to learn about was native fermentation, using like natural yeast and going that route. Not from like the natural wine prospect, but that was the thing that interested me most. From like the food aspect of it, was doing spontaneous fermentations. And the wines I really liked here in Oregon, like Erie, Patty Green,
You know, a lot of those wines I knew they were all, like Patty had always talked about native yeast and how they're, like the flora of the cellar really, you know, was a key part of what they did. And yeah, that's so just like learning about things was really fun. Really fun to try new things and just see what happened.
And what was the reaction to the initial wine?
So my thoughts on it, or
I was thinking consumer reaction, but your thoughts as well.
Yeah, so like '08 was pretty lucky. '08 was a really good vintage. like to start with fruit in '08, which is I don't think we've had another year as forgiving as '08, where it's like just picking. You could go out to a vineyard and be like, okay, this needs 2 weeks or whatever till it's ripe, and then you just go pick it in 2 weeks. There were no challenges. So the fruit started out with like, you know, really pure fruit flavors in '08, and the wines have actually aged well for, I mean, it's a nice vintage. That's Oregon and Washington. It was very nice across the board. And so they turned out nice. And, you know, it's great, like, Aaron gave me some great advice. He's like, you know, you ever have like a really nice bag of weed? He's like, you want to like play with it. He's like, it looks so good, you want to play with it. He's like, but then you start playing with it and it turns into shake, and then all you have is a bag of shake. He's like, don't touch these things. That, like in reference to like barrels of wine. He's like, just like, because he would like see me like tasting, like thinking, and he's like, just leave them, just chill, just, you know, without help like that, I probably would have screwed everything up and not done a good job. So, but the first one turned out pretty good. I think it's still like my favorite Viognier was our '08 Viognier. We did half stainless, half older French oak, and it was very lovely, very good one. And probably maybe the best Viognier I've still made. So, yeah.
And you mentioned you found distribution fairly readily in Whole Foods and in New York. So, with the feedback from there, did you get an idea that you'd made something that had an appeal?
I started to think it might be something that could be, and like at the time, restaurants were like screwed. Like post-recession was not a great time to even think about. Even at like 23, I was like, oh, this is a bad time to be in the restaurant industry. And that just seemed like something to try. And yeah.
So tell me about growing from there. You mentioned you know dealing with all of the initial paperwork and the stuff like that has to go on. Tell me about picking a name and about sort of growing your business.
Yeah, the name was like almost completely accidental. It's kind of like the thing with like the paperwork. I had no idea. Like it happened so quick between when like was thinking like, okay, I could do this, to when I had to get the TTB paperwork in and had to pick a brand name. like I think I spent 2 days thinking about what to call it, and that was just like the first silly thing. I was like, that's kind of unique. That's kind of a cool idea. And like Fausse Piste means like a wrong path or a bad false path, and it seemed to fit. It was very cheesy. It still is. And that was, that's how I picked it. There was no thought. I probably should have picked something that was a little easier to say. but yeah, that was all that went into it. There was nothing greater than, it was just like, I was just sitting there like writing things out, like just thinking about what to call it. And that's what popped in. And like early on, like, I always wanted to be like, I knew early on we weren't ever gonna have like vineyards probably or anything like that. Just financially has never been an option, because don't make a lot of money cooking, and I didn't have any savings really going into it. And so I was like, I want to treat it more like, I always loved like the philosophy of like the Oregon craft brewers at the time, who were just kind of like making whatever. Like this first small brewery, so they're like just coming up with like fun names, fun ideas, like changing it up a lot. And I thought that's what I kind of want to do. I want to come make different wines every year
I learned out pretty quick that distributors don't really like that in the marketplace. In wine is not set up for that. They don't really like it when you pull SKUs, like completely change out wine. So I find a balance between that now, but pretty early on it was like, that was what I wanted to do, was just try making different things. And I think the first like 3 years we made like 14 different wines that we've never made again, really. So yeah, so that was all pretty fun.
Tell me about finding what you did want to make, finding grapes for it, and figuring out what the style you wanted to make, and kind of developing sort of the style of the brand.
Yeah. So I always wanted the wines to not be super fruity, to try to get away. Like there's a lot of Washington wines I love that are super fruity, but I think what makes Oregon so elegant is that the wines aren't. Like the wines, with exceptions, like some places in the Yamhill can be very like bubbly and fruity for Pinot Noir in warm years. But for the most part, the wines are very elegant. Like the Dundee Hills are super pretty, super herbaceous and secondary, and I love those characteristics a lot in wine. In Washington, outside of like Cayuse and some of the other guys in Walla Walla, it was much more bombastic, fruit forward, cherry cola wines. I mean, like there's Quilceda Creek and other people that are a little more serious where their wines are aged and get secondary stuff, but I just really love those more savory notes, and learning more about how oxygen in the fermentation, like pre-oxidation of whites, really just talking to other winemakers, and like the decision to go all spontaneous fermentation. I went to Walla Walla with Chad Stock, like in '09, to look at some equipment for Antikythera, and we just talked the whole drive about like fermentation. And just like he was like, you got to try it. He's like, all you do is just put less sulfur in and just leave it. And so I tried it and just really loved the results there. And then the next step was just going more and more whole cluster every year, especially with Syrah. And not everyone loves like 100% whole cluster, but it's like, it's a thing I really, really enjoy doing. Yeah, and it's just learning how to trying to, tame the heat in Washington, more or less. And looking at the same time, we've worked in vineyards all over the state, looking for like places, like just looking for different textures and flavors, and seeing what the different regions provide.
Tell me about some of the things you're making now, or that have you made, that a combination you're proud of, or a vintage you're proud of, that kind of showcase sort of your ideas like the best.
Like I'd say like the two wines that they're like kind of our most unusual ones, but the ones that I dig the most. One is our fish sauce, which is a sparkling muscat from a north-facing vineyard in the Ewell Amity Hills. It's most of what we do is in like older French oak, but that's all stainless. And then we just press it, direct press in stainless, and then just do like the pet nat or method ancestral fermentation. Or just bottle it and then disgorge it after a few months. And I really like that. Like the muscat is super floral, super but it's also complex. Do give it some time on the lees before disgorging. So it's got some weight, and it's got some savoriness. It's not over the top. It's not sweet. I really dig that one. And then the other one is our pizza sauce, which is, it's like we've gone, stupid names. Just devolved over the years.
Memorable names.
We devolved over the years. The pizza sauce is kind of something I started like when we moved to this winery in 2018, 19, 18, I don't know. A couple of years ago, we had like 40 barrels or so that we didn't know what to do with. It's like we had a lot of wine from a couple of big vintages. And old cellar assistant Ty and I were like, we need to find a blend to get rid of some of the stuff, just to have space. We moved to here. And we put this blend together, and it was a multi-vintage blend. And it was Pinot, Malbec, Syrah, and Grenache, and a little bit of Viognier, and maybe some other randoms. And it was delicious. It was just I think it was one of the more delicious wines and one of the more delicious reds we'd ever blended. It was just very fruit forward, but also serious, because it was like a 5 vintage blend. And I don't know, it's it's fun. It's just, it's not overly serious. It goes well with food. It goes well with pizza. And we were just eating pizza when we did it. So hence the name. And now we kind of do that. It's like one of my favorite things we do. I have like a base wine tank that I'll rack some in and then rack a little bit out and blend it with some other things. And so it's kind of a Solera, just base that started not on purpose, but it's one of my favorite things that we get to do. And it's also like they're both like it's 100% whole cluster. About half of it, I think about a quarter of it's carbonic, and the rest is traditional whole cluster. And it's no sulfur till bottling; it just kind of lives and does its thing. So it's kind of like a ever-changing blend. I don't know.
Tell me about finding a market for your wines. Obviously, you're not doing straight Pinot Noirs or haven't for a little while. How have you found the marketplace for your wine? How have you found people who are interested and excited about what you're doing? And you mentioned sort of the consistency earlier in terms of you want to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
How have you found that balance between making what people are expecting and having the fun you want to have?
I think that it started at a weird time where that's what people were getting. Like the wine market changed so quickly from when I started in 08 till now. Like before, it was all very like not classic, but it like score-driven thing. Robert Parker-driven wines were a very big part of the market. Like when I started in 08, and now I haven't heard someone talk about a score really out in the market in a couple of years. Like it went from being like the focus to now people want to try things. I think, for lack of a better word, millennials are getting more into wine and have way more interest than just like this one estate got 90 points or 94 points. And that's changed a lot. And I think we just not tapped into that. It was just there. It was just like, it worked out well. Like when people were first looking to put something from Oregon that wasn't Pinot Noir on the list, or from the Northwest that wasn't, that was a little bit unusual. It was just, we were just there. They're like one of the few, like other than Owen Rowe, there was like just a couple other people making things that weren't Pinot in the valley. So that was really just kind of walked in there a little bit, I guess. And really seeing a lot of diversity, like especially in like New York and San Francisco. A few years ago, people started getting really into like naturally made wines, for a lack of a better term, which is kind of where we were leaning at the time, and starting to get into more and more. And we met these guys in California called Revel Wine, or like our distributor there, Brooks, Johan, Teutonic, like a lot of like-minded people, in a place where people were really getting into that. Like the Bay Area in particular, I think really drove a lot of what like the U.S. wine market looks like now, in terms of like what people are drinking, like, and the boom of like what is like the overall natural wine world. Just kind of, we're just there, just through those guys. And
so an accidental trendsetter. That's what you are.
I wouldn't say we're no, but just accidental. Yeah. And like I remember I was like down there with one of the sales reps down there, this guy Wolfgang. I was like the first time I had a pet nat was in San Fran at a little wine bar down there. I was like, man, I don't know if people in Oregon are ready for this stuff. Like, I don't think we're there yet. And I mean, now look at it, like, that's like such a big, definitely on premise, like restaurants, and like, that's a big part of it's a big movement, I guess, for the wine industry to shift so quickly. In like 10 years, it's completely changed.
So we've talked about this a little bit already, but I'm curious if you could define your winemaking philosophy. What would you say is the philosophy that drives your wines?
Minimalist, probably, would be like, we haven't used a new barrel, and like that was the last barrel we bought. Was that the Demi-Wee? And that was back in 2011 or 12. So trying to do as little as possible. Like I haven't used any additives in fermentation other than a little superfood occasionally for when we get VA in, I don't know, like 5 years, 6 years. We haven't added any sulfur to barrels to bottling in the same amount of time. Everything's been much less, not a lot of racking, not a lot of just leaving things alone. That's trying to do as little as possible has been, but in a good way, in like thoughtful ways. I'd say that's probably what we've been doing.
So tell me about you started 2008, 2009. Tell me about the growth to now. How much more are you making now, and how has the business sort of evolved in that time?
Yeah, so every year we kind of make a little bit more. I don't know, like, I think by the time I left in 2012, we were making like close to 2,000 cases of wine. So it was like pretty much doubling production every year till then. And then 2012 was our biggest year. I think we did like 65 tons or something like that, which was, we built a little cellar in Southeast Portland in a restaurant, and that was probably too much for that year. It was chaos. And then we've gone down a little bit every year from then. Like, I'd say like a good year, like I'd like to be making like 30 tons a year. We only made 5 this year with everything going on. But
talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that, don't worry. And tell me about you've been now part of the Portland wine scene for a little while. Tell me about your sort of what you've seen as part of Portland wine as it's grown up a bit, and sort of your place in it.
Yeah, I think we arguably have like the most exciting urban wine scene probably in the United States. Like Portland used to be somewhat affordable for like warehouse space and stuff like that, and I think that's why there was a lot of us that started around the same time in Portland. Like I think in 2012, when we moved, there was like 10 wineries in town, and I think by the end of that year there was probably 25. Like, I think a lot of us had the same idea, we were all living in Portland. A lot of us were living in Portland and driving down to like Newburgh, or, I made the decision just like, I was either going to move to Newburgh or move the winery to Portland. Like, I couldn't do the commute anymore. And that was, it was just cheaper in Portland. Like, space was actually cheaper in Portland than down there. And housing too, surprisingly, at the time. It's just weird.
It seems like a long time ago.
Yeah, it feels like, yeah. Yeah, now it's changed quite a bit. So I think it was like it's a very diverse, there's not a lot of overlap in what people were doing in Portland at the time, in between like Hip Chicks and Groschau, us. Inzo started that year. Teutonic hadn't quite moved to Portland, but they were more Portland based because their winery was out like in the East Valley. And Division, I mean, of course, we both kind of started the same year. And And I think that really, between like, I don't know, especially between like Division and Enzo and us, there was a lot of like community. A lot of us didn't have all the equipment and anything that we needed. So it was a lot of trading stuff and trading like, how are you handling this aspect of working in the city? How do you like, even simple things like parking, like where to park a trailer, how to deal with the water bureau, like that kind of stuff. And you know, like I think, and you look at the people who like Corey from Jackalope was working at Division. Scott was there the first year from Bow and Arrow. Anne from Gila Terra was there. So it was like a lot of people starting, especially there, who just made like a couple barrels of wine. James Ron, I think, was there the year after. So it was just cool to be part of that community and a lot of like, you know, a lot of help, a lot of community help. And now I don't even know how many wineries we have in Portland, probably 75, 80, I guess.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. You would know more probably.
So you mentioned you think it's the most exciting urban wine scene in America. What makes you say that? What makes it exciting?
I think Washington's always had it with Woodinville, and that's its own little weird thing where it's more like incubator style. There was like, you know, a couple storage unit manufacturing places that all got turned into wineries. Where here it was like much more like integrated in the community. It wasn't like in, you know, like this industrial warehouse, which is funny, but now we're in a small industrial warehouse. But it was, I think you just look at the diversity of what people are making and what interests are and styles and, you know, approaches and backgrounds of the people that are here. It's a cool group. It's like, you know, just 100 different stories of how people got into it and what their approach is. And it's always fun to see everyone. It's happened in a year, but yeah. Eventually, yeah, we'll get back to it.
What about the city's reaction to the wine scene as it's grown?
I don't think they've done a great job. Like, I think the city of Portland, I have this theory, does not really care for small businesses all that much. They don't really my experience is that they don't have an olive branch out there. So all this has happened like kind of in spite of what the Water Bureau had no idea how to handle us when we first opened. They were trying to classify us as a brewery or a bakery. It was like, well, we're neither of these things. But these are all just little things, and they just didn't understand it really at first. And now they're a little more. They have a little more of like a concept of it. But I think the one guy was like, I just don't. It was like one of like the permitters, or I don't remember who it was, but he was like, I just don't understand why a winery would be here. Like they didn't really like. And like we were trying to put a tank in, and they had like, or a big foeder. We were trying to put a foeder in the old winery, and they were like, well, you need to like have it latched down for earthquake thing. It needs to be bolted to this. It's like, it's just gonna sit there. This thing's not going anywhere. It'll fall a foot if there's an earthquake. We'll have bigger concerns. But yeah, they didn't really know. Now I think they're a little more like, it's grown more, so. And like Travel Portland was always very great about it. They were like, you know.
What about you don't really have a tasting room here in the most classic sense. Obviously, there's a space for tasting, but
yeah.
Without the kind of built-in advantage of a tasting space, how do you sell wine to consumers? What's your connecting piece?
Well, traditionally, like pretty much through the whole history of the winery, we've done very little like direct to consumer. When we had a restaurant, that was probably the closest we ever came to having that. But it was more just a restaurant. We were selling all kinds of wine, like not just ours. I think we had a flight of ours.
but most of our sales is through distribution, through partners. Like we're in like 10 states right now, and so that's really how. And we have our online store, but that's not really that's not a tasting room in the valley or
Right.
Yeah, it's not. It's just a different thing. I think before COVID, I'd have like a couple people every week or every other week, but we're small. I mean, it's just me right now, so it's just not an option.
Sure. Well, let's back up a second. I wanted to talk about food as well. Obviously, food has remained a big part of your life. You mentioned the restaurants. So tell us about, once you started making wine, tell us about the parallel track of food for you and how you continued in that industry as well.
Yeah, when I got back, restaurants are still I would love to cook. Again, it's not really an option right now. I was trying to get into cooking a little more right when the pandemic started, actually. Just not a great time. Again, not a great time to do that. The restaurant industry has taken an unfortunate blow here. But in 2012, we opened a place, and I really wanted to make a wine version of a brew pub, almost. So we had really wine-friendly food was what kind of our menu was focusing on, and yeah, it was cool. It was we had a great team, and it was very collaborative. Our menus, what we'd have, we did a lot of game, a lot of wild foods, which went really well with a lot of the wines we were pouring. We had 40 pretty naturally focused wine list from around the world. It was just really fun to play with food and wine like that, and do unusual pairings. For a while we had a mystery menu we'd do. There was a 4 or 5 course, just random stuff we were cooking and pairing, and Jeff Veer, who now has his own little wine empire. He was our wine director, the winesman, as you'd say. And so it was fun to work with Jeff on that, and really we had cooked some cool things and paired some cool things, and had a lot of very fun wines on the list. And it was neat to, as from a chef's point of view, it was really neat to taste every day. That was very eye-opening, was to taste with our wine reps every day, and just really get a grasp of what we were trying to do on the food side.
Tell me about balancing that. Then you have a growing wine business, and
there was no balance. It was chaos. It was chaos. Trying to do sales was the hardest. Going to other markets to do sales, and then coming back and jumping into restaurant service was not. I didn't have a kid then, so it was hard. Maybe too ambitious. But we did it for almost 3 years, and it was a great time. But we had a kid, so it was just no way to keep going.
Sure. Do you prefer cooking or winemaking?
I prefer cooking, personally. I love the brigade of a kitchen. I like that kind of camaraderie and teamwork. I at Onro, that was kind of the same philosophy in the cellar. We had a big cellar team that had a lot of that kind of elements to it. But winemaking is kind of a slow and lonely process if you're a small winemaker. We're lucky here at Way Down, there's 3 of us here. There's Ian and Tyler. So it's there is community here, where if it was just the winery, it'd be kind of quiet and a lot of music, a lot of podcasts. And that's rewarding too. It's just, I love that community and kind of collaborative kitchen environment. Really,
Miss that a lot, actually.
Do you find that cooking and winemaking bring out like different parts of your skill set or different parts of your personality?
They're both very rewarding in different ways. Like cooking on a line is like immediate gratification, where you get an order, you cook it, put it up, someone enjoys it. Where winemaking like is years for that same kind of like. I mean, you don't really like. You occasionally get feedback on something years later after you've done it. Like someone will be like, I got like a message about like a wine we did in 2015. They're like, I didn't really like this thing. It's like, okay, I'll try to plan for something 4 years in the future. And they're just very different ways of thinking. Just for wine, it's like you make a decision now, and you hear about the impacts of it, whether it's good or bad, in like 10 years. So, yeah.
Can't really send it back to the kitchen.
No. You can, but it's a different level. Like shipping's involved, and it's not just like, well, we'll put a new steak out for you. Like,
have you found with winemaking that you have? We talked about your philosophy earlier, you're minimalist as you described yourself. Have you found that's changed at all since you started? You mentioned in the beginning, kind of wanting to overdo it.
Yeah.
Have you found yourself, is it easier now for you to trust the process? Is it easier for you to trust the wine will turn out how you want it to?
Sometimes there's always a little bit of like, nothing's guaranteed in wine. There's so many different factors, so many inputs that influence the final wine. But for the most part, yeah. Like, I mean, there's things that like compound, where like one decision will change something like vintages will definitely, especially the way we're doing things like with native fermentation. Like if you have a vintage with high pH and we're doing a whole cluster, it can really cause some issues in the cellar later on. And it's like, do we change our technique and philosophy based on that? It's just something I still think about. Because you don't necessarily won't always have VA, or sometimes you will in those conditions. It's just trying to like, and every year has been very different and challenging in the last 10 years. Every year has been hottest to coldest or unusual in some ways. We haven't had like, I guess 15, 16, 17 were pretty steady. And 18. But other than that, it's been kind of up and down.
Is there a certain type of vintage that you prefer? Is there a certain amount of challenge you prefer, or do you like the smooth and steady?
Cold. Any cold vintage we can get, I'll take it. Like 2011 is probably my favorite vintage, personally.
Why is that?
It was just cold. The wine's beautiful. There's not a ton of fruit. They're very fresh. They're aging very well. But they took a long time to open up. Like we were holding things in barrel for like 3 years to get them to open up. And like if we'd bottled stuff earlier, they would just be like lean and not interesting.
Well, talk about challenging years. 2020 obviously comes to mind.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple different challenges going on. Let's start with the pandemic and how it affected your work and business and sort of what you see coming out of it, hopefully here soon.
Yeah. The pandemic, it's been very unfair how hard it's hit restaurants. And I think that our government should just really have done more to help save independent restaurants. I don't know, we had a lot of friends close early on. And I don't know, like a lot of our sales is at independent restaurants. Like that's probably like 60% of our sales. So that was one thing, but that's not like like in 2008, there wasn't a pandemic and a recession. There wasn't like mass, casualties as a part of it. So it was a different thing to navigate. this one, like, it was really, really tough for me personally early on. Like, we've got kids, a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. And like, my wife works full time in a different 9-to-5 job. And I had to really, like, we weren't seeing my parents. We had no childcare at that point. So it was like trying to balance, and it all happened pretty quick. You know, it's like, okay, schools are closed. And now I just was like, had 2 kids all day, every day, which is great. I love them. And it has been a lot of fun. But at the same time, it's like, there's something that's got to give there. There was like not, just like, what's if like our sales just pretty much took a nosedive in March. I think we went like 2 months and didn't really sell anything other than like we did some like online stuff that like luckily like people were ordering wine online. It's like, hey, we have this sale, you know, check this out. And like all our distributors were rattled too. You know, when you lose, like I remember talking to our Napa or California guys. You know, they went. One of our better accounts is a place called the Slanted Door, which is like one of the busiest restaurants in San Francisco. And they went 1 week from doing thousands of covers to doing 30, and that's probably their biggest account. And that's just not like, what do you do? There's no plan for that. And so it was really interesting to navigate. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what, like, you know, luckily, like Ian runs this place. He was very supportive early on, like, you know, we'll figure it out. We'll get through it. Like, and luckily, like, things started to like level out. People started buying wine a little bit. It's weird to be in this business where you have to sell things. Like, I'm probably not the best salesperson. And but it's just a different challenge. It was a different, and we were at a place where we could just decide to make less wine this year already, just because I didn't have the bandwidth or the time to do it, or really the focus to do it, like, or the will even. It was interesting.
Did you ever consider not making wine at all this year?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to not make anything.
What changed your mind?
One of our vineyard partners was like, you know, just make the wine and we can figure it out later. Like, they wanted to have it go somewhere, and it was for our like fish sauce. So it's like, it's one of the wines that we just can't keep in stock, really. Like, can't disgorge it fast enough when we can. So we did that. We just had a very small little harvest, one day harvest, which is the complete opposite of everything. And it was kind of nice after like 12 years or whatever to take a little, like, take a break. But yeah, I still don't know. I don't even know what this year is like.
Well, let's talk about that. You mentioned not really knowing what to do going in, and obviously different kind of sales now, different kind of distribution channels now. So, what do you see for this year and beyond? What are you sort of hoping for, and what are you sort of planning for?
The strange thing is we've had more outreach than ever before internationally. Like, we started selling a little bit of wine to Japan, a little bit to Korea, some other, like, more international outreach than ever before, which is kind of nice at the same time. Like, as things are like, you know, sales are dying in the United States, to have, like, you know, places that handled the pandemic a little more responsibly. It's really, you know, changed their outlook on things and what they, you know, thinking about buying wines. And, you know, I think distributors are very good at selling wine, and they've found sales channels. Again, you know, people are changing their buying habits again and going more retail. So we just have to be able to do that shift. But like with wine, nothing's very fast. So it's this.
So as you look for the future for yourself, say in the next 5-ish years, what are you hoping for? What does the brand look like, and what does your life look like?
I have no idea. No idea. I would like to keep doing it. It's fun. It's you know, it is like a very financially burdensome business. There's a lot of cash going out at certain times of the year. So cash flow is really, like, I wish I had a better idea of that getting into it. Like, it was, so in years like this where it's challenging, it's really like, it can be very stressful with that. Like, most people think, oh, wine's like, you know, it's fun, and there are some stressful things to it. I'd like to keep doing it I like this place. I like the situation here. Like, we're in a unique setting. We got great community. I think just kind of like stopping for a second and figuring out the lay of the land going forward is going to be key. Like, if we make a bad decision on bottling something, it could really take time to sort out. So we've been pretty slow bottling and releasing things, only like as we really need it. And yeah, there's things I'd love to make and love to do. I just don't know, like,
Sure.
yeah, the risk.
Sure. And obviously, you mentioned how hard restaurants have been hit by this, and you mentioned you were just kind of getting back into cooking at that time. So, what do you see for the future of the restaurant industry, and do you see yourself as a part of it?
I would love to be. I don't know what the future of the restaurant industry. Like, I think the people who like the Chef's Table group in Portland, they are planning on opening more restaurants like in Lake Oswego. They're planning on, people are actively trying to open places, like people who have like greater understanding of markets than I ever will. And I think that's a good sign. Like, and there's been a lot of places that have closed, but there hasn't been, I think a lot of people are just waiting, just put things on pause and waiting. Because, it could be like, people love to eat out. People love to do those things. And like, after 2008, people, like, things went crazy. The restaurant industry went crazy in Portland. That's probably the biggest boom was post 08. Like 2010, 2011, 2012, there was like so many places opening. So I think we'll probably see something like that again. There's a lot of cooks who want to open places. The market be there for it. That's. But I think we have so many talented chefs, especially like in the Northwest, that it'd be a shame if we lost what we built, like what the community built.
Yeah. So we talked about the sort of the Portland wine scene earlier. I'm curious about your perspective on the Oregon wine industry in general. Obviously, you started out working in the Valley, in a very busy place. I'm sort of curious what your initial impressions were of the Oregon wine industry and some of the maybe key changes you've seen in your time in it.
Yeah, I think it's been great. The evolution of the Oregon wine industry is great. We were pretty lucky to have really good, David Lett. We're pretty lucky to have him starting things off, and Jason's really done a fantastic job with Erie. I think having people like that at the helm really changes a lot. I think people are making good decisions in what they're planting. I think the wineries that are opening, most of them have great purpose in what they're doing, what they want to do, like their ambitions and what they want to plant and what they want to. Pinot Noir is still king. I think it'd be great if it will always be, but I think it'd be great to have even more diversity in what grapes we're working with here, which is happening, like at Johann and a lot of the vineyards. People are experimenting with new things that, we've had Pinot here for like 54 years, something like that.
56?
56, 54. And we're still learning a lot about what does really well and what doesn't do really well. I think people have lots of different viewpoints on like which clones are good and that kind of stuff. Like the old clones are my favorites for Pinot. I think we'll just see more people trying things. The less risky it gets to plant something else other than Pinot Noir, we'll see more. Like Trousseau has really started to happen in a big way, and kind of more uncommon varietals. And as people warm up to them, and as their like knowledge, people want to try these things on like overall. So I think that'll just kind of continue to expand more and more. And diversity of technique. Like, you got people trying all sorts of other wineries trying, amphora and concrete, and getting away from just like the straightforward like wine fermenter barrel bottle. Like, it's trying new techniques. It's cool.
Obviously, the future is cloudy enough right now, but I'm going to ask about the future of Oregon wine anyway.
Yeah.
You're talking about some of the changes you're seeing in the moment now. What do you think the industry looks like down the road? What's coming? Maybe what are you looking forward to, or what are you afraid of in the future?
Well, Oregon's so small it's such a small piece of the United States, like wine scene. I think we're like the fourth largest wine producer.
Fifth largest now currently.
And Texas is growing, Virginia's growing. But I think we have punched way above our weight in the international wine scene. The fact that we could even ever sell wine in out of the U.S. says something about the overall brand of Oregon, the Oregon wine industry. And I think part of that, we're going to get more corporate. I think we'll see more. It's already happening in the last couple of years. I think we'll get more corporate influence. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think they'll just make the name recognition of your average person on the southeast sees a bottle of Oregon wine, they probably don't know much about it. And the more you get the big groups involved, they really do a lot of promotion for that. So I think that's probably the future. We'll have more independent people coming in. There's a lot of young people moving here in the wine industry who want to do that. Who go to college for that, who weren't just working at cellars before and starting their thing with purpose, coming here with purpose to do things, which is very different than how a lot of us, I think I knew one person that I worked with that had an enology degree pretty much the entire time.
Yeah.
And there's more, that's a growing aspect of the Oregon wine industry, which means we'll just have better wines overall.
You talked earlier about some of the people who mentored you when you got started, and a wide list of interesting names there. I'm curious about your role in mentoring the next people who are coming up, and if there are sort of words of wisdom or advice you have for people that you're giving them as they get into the industry.
Oh, that's funny. It's weird. It's funny to think about that.
Not to put you on a pedestal.
Yeah, no. I've had more. The bummers were so small. We really can't have. It's never worked out. It's really hard to have steady cellar help in the wine industry if you're small. It's so seasonal. It's it's so tough. And even for us, even having a cellar hand for harvest is kind of a stretch most years. But it's been interesting talking to people about fermentation, other winemakers, other people interested about spontaneous fermentation and how to use it. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. Really, it's just it's just a different gives you such different results. It's like baking sourdough versus baking regular bread. They're just kind of night and day in ways. They're almost different things. Even though it's the same, it's bread, but they're almost like different. Wine is kind of that same thought. And there's nothing wrong with either way. It's just thinking differently about things. I don't know. Mostly advice like people ask me about is how to operate with the city. how did we do it? You know, how to start a small winery and when you don't have a vineyard. Like, those are probably the most common questions I get are like, how did you do it? Like, and I just say try it, but it's expensive. So just
pretty good advice for getting in the industry in general.
Yeah, anything you're trying to start that's like very like, if you open a restaurant, you better come with operating expenses for at least a year, because if you don't, you're just shooting yourself in the foot before you even start.
Do you have a favorite memory or moment so far in your winemaking or food career?
But my favorite like wine memory was in 2010. I went back to the Rhone and went to visit. It was kind of random. We were there with my folks, and we had dinner at this little like place in Valence. I can't remember the name of the restaurant, and it was just like a little like town restaurant thing. And the guy who was the somm and only server in this restaurant, his name was Serge, and we just started talking. Like, he knew more about like Côte Rôtie and the Northern Rhone than anybody I'd ever met. Like, his wine list was out of control, crazy, like for just this little place. And he's like, actually, I'm going to this like party later. Do you want to go? I was like, I just met you. I don't know. He's like, oh, I'll get done around 11. Let's go. And we went to Cornos, and we drove like in this little like van. Like, I'd never met this guy. He spoke a little bit of English, and I speak just a little bit of French. And he's like, let's go party with these winemaker guys. And it was like a little biodynamic wine party tasting thing at like 1 in the morning in Cornos, which is not a big village. And we ended up hanging with this guy, Mathieu Barret, who has a winery called Domaine de Coulet, who is like a biodynamic, I don't know, very, very fantastic producer. And he looks like a teddy bear. He has a wine that's like a teddy bear. And we're just hanging out at his cellar till like 4 in the morning, eating like cured meat that they had like hanging in the cellar, tasting Cornos, just with like, it was something very fun and unusual. And like, I think I got back to the hotel at like 6 in the morning. It was just like, I don't know. That was probably my favorite. And he's like the guy who, it was the first time I had really, he really like helped me like understand whole cluster fermentation as well. His wines are all whole cluster, and his Syrahs are incredible. So that was probably my favorite wine moment.
It's not even just a fun party, but also like actually help with something you were going to do.
Yeah, I learned so much from just going there and hanging out, and like just drinking with these guys in a tiny village.
That's awesome. I love it. That's all the questions that I have for you today. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here today that we should have covered?
Not that I can. That's all pretty.
Excellent.
Cool.
Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your stories with us, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.